I'd like to show you an entertaining and instructive game from the final round of the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour final. And this is between Anish Giri playing white and Wesley playing black. Wesley having a good tournament. Well, of course, the tournament was won by Magnus Carlsen with a round to spare. And he was in fantastic form. But, well, there were others that were shining as well. So Wesley was one of them. Anyway, final round game. Here we go. So Giri is white. It's a Spanish. And yes, your favourite variation, my favourite variation, the Berlin. And no endgame, but we have this very complex middle game that arises after d3 and then exchanging on c6. Strategy is very, very complex here. Now in the old days, well, I say in the old days, kind of around about 10-15 years ago, white would be playing with knight c3, maybe queen e2, and castling on the queen side and going for a kingside pawn storm. But Giri castles here, and if you recall, I looked at the game between Magnus Carlsen and Wesley from one of the earlier rounds, and Carlsen played c3 and we had this really complex game. Do check out that video if you haven't seen it. Very, very difficult position. But Giri went knight c3 and he has played like this before. And in fact, there's another Giri game from Stavanger 2022 which went to castles kingside. And, well, fairly regular, you could say. But this time Wesley plays more aggressively. By playing queen e7, he clearly has in mind castling queenside here, but he's keeping his options open. Queen on a useful square anyway. And now an interesting strategy from Giri. The knight simply pops back to e2. So this is the idea that the knight wants to head to g3. Well, we see that in the Spanish in so many variations. And then looking to come to the outpost on f5. Now this is interesting because very often we see this knight taking another route to get to f5. From b1 to d2 to f1 to g3. But of course, with that route, the rook would have to move. But in this case, you could argue that white is saving a tempo because the rook doesn't have to move. It's interesting. But Wesley isn't in a mood to mess around, and he immediately targets potentially this knight coming to g3. He just wants to attack it. And yes, along with queen e7, this gives every indication that he's looking to castle on the queen side. a3 from Giri. Okay, he's reacting by perhaps expanding here. And Wesley preempts that with bishop d6. Now this is interesting because if Giri just goes forward, then in fact, black can still castle kingside and just break up those pawns with a5. So instead of expanding, bishop e3 played. b6, well, the bishop might just come to b7 and then castles queenside. Knight d2, good move. So the knight spinning to c4 to put pressure here, but also freeing the f pawn. And when you have this particular structure, this strong central pawn chain against this particular structure, which you see in so many different openings, Spanish, but also the four knights, then strategically it makes so much sense to get in f4. The very famous game, Capablanca-Janowski, if you might know that, rook and pawn endgame, an absolute classic. Wesley plows on. We're a long way from a rook and pawn endgame, folks. h4. So he wants to play h3, and that will really weaken white's kingside. Without a light squared bishop, You know, after h3, white would have to play g3, and those light squares would be really weak. So therefore, Giri plays h3, blocking that pawn. g5. Okay, Wesley wants to open things up. Knight c4. Not possible at the moment. That will just be taken. But after knight f8, now there is a threat to play g4. I have to say here, I think I would just go f3 and just shut down that possibility. Now, the knight can bounce around here. Strategically, it's a very interesting position, but feels like, well, that's what I would do anyway. Knight takes d6. Again, f3 looks normal to me. And then you can try and expand on the queen side. Or possibly play in the middle. But d4. Okay, this is the classical response. Got rid of that bishop, so there's no danger down this diagonal. And you push in the centre. But it does allow g4. And I have to say, this would terrify me. Because now there's going to be some action on the g file. f3, the bishop is pushed back. Queen d3. Aha, Giri has a little idea. We'll see what that is in a second. And if rook g8, then rook f2 defends. f6 bolsters the e-pawn. We'll see that's important in a second. And perhaps, you know, allows the queen to switch over. Well, I would still be looking to play rook f2 here. You can perhaps tell I'm a total chicken. You know, I respect what's going on the g-file here, and that would terrify me. I would want to play rook f2, and perhaps the king could wander through into the middle if necessary. But Giri plays very aggressively with f4. Rook g8. And again, I would look to play rook f2. But here is Giri's idea. He exchanges everything on e5 and plays queen c3. I think he had this in mind right from when he played queen d3. He was looking at this idea. It's a simple double attack. Queen takes c6 would, in fact, win the rook. So Wesley deals with that and allows that pawn to be taken on e5, but he has a counterpunch here. Rook takes pawn check. Of course, if that's taken, then there's a discovered check, and queen takes queen. So that rook can't be taken. So king h1. Here is where I'd like you to have a think. You're playing black. What would you do here? What should Wesley play in this position? Cheers, folks. Black to play. Wesley took the knight. Not best. He had a brain freeze at this moment. Rook takes knight is not the best. Knight g6. Good move. Attacking the queen. That's possible. And then h3 to defend the rook. And it's just a very unclear position. Very unclear. Rook g6 also possible. h3 also possible. But not rook takes d2. This is a big mistake. In fact, there's more than one good continuation for white. Queen h5 is possible. Simple double attack. Check. Now, it's not completely clear because black takes here. You've got to get the right step with the king. Still got to watch out for bishop d5. It is better for white, but it's a bit messy. But Giri found something even better. He played, are you ready? Rook takes knight, and this is a killer. An absolute killer. Well, first of all, queen takes bishop. This is just the end. If queen e7, check, and you take the rook in the corner, And king d8. Well, this is just mate with checks. Actually, very simple mate next move. So after rook takes, king takes rook played. And now queen h8 check. Well, if the bishop goes in the way, then rook f1 check. Again, it's all pretty easy. It all happens with checks. Watch out for that one in the corner. Here. And yeah, well, when the king comes here, you could just go rook d1 check, for example. And mate. So check happened. King f7. Again, the rook comes over, and Wesley was a gentleman. He allowed the checkmate on h6, supported by the bishop. Phew, what a finish! What a crushing finish. When it looked in this position as though Giri was in trouble, having allowed, well, at least in this position, having allowed rook takes pawn. But I mean, maybe Wesley. Well, it's hard to say what he overlooked here because rook takes knight is incorrect for a couple of reasons. But yeah, very nice finish from Giri. Well spotted with rook takes knight. Excellent calculation. It is a rapid play game. These things happen. But anyway, nice finish. And Giri actually, well, won this match on tiebreak, but he didn't have a good tournament. In fact, Anish Giri finished right at the bottom of the tournament table. He was in 8th position. Carlsen won it convincingly. He was in really fantastic form. Wesley was 2nd, and Jan Krzysztof Duda 3rd. Arjun Erigaisi 4th. There we go. Hope you enjoyed that. More to come shortly on the PowerPlayChess channel. Stay tuned. If you're not a subscriber, do subscribe. Just click on the bell for instant notifications. Thanks for watching.